All right, it is Sunday, and for me, that means it's Pokemon Day. Every single Sunday, I always rock up at my local league. I like to get my reps in, just like keeping my hands warm. We don't really get that many events where I live, so just being able to go to like locals on a Sunday is just something that I can do to unwind and chill for a bit and play some Pokemon, which is always exciting. Today, we do have a league challenge as well. I believe maybe I only need 1 or 2 more firsts. For CP-wise today, we'd only have maybe 3 on the table, which isn't too much considering I already have my Worlds invite. So for today, I think I'm going to be grinding Pidgeot Control. I've been playing this the last couple of events, and I've been really enjoying this deck. I really like the idea of using Pidgeot to just like improve my general game sense. So I'm going to quickly get my deck all sorted, and I'm going to print out my deck list. Alright, so I've just made 1 change to my list. I did include 1 Mela, but I am swapping that out for a Sandshrew, as at the moment I think there's probably a high likelihood that people are playing general control type builds of decks that Sandshrew is really good into. So we're going to be playing 1 of Sandshrew instead of the Mela. Now, if anybody does want to use this deck that I'm going to be playing today, I will link the entire deck list down in the description below. So definitely check it out. Alright, we're on the road. We are ready to game. Now, because this is just like a casual week and it's not like anything serious like a cup, I obviously just haven't like really tested or anything, because you don't really have to, especially if you already have your points. This is more just about getting in some reps, having a little bit of fun, and chilling with the homies. I have no idea who's going to be there, but considering it's pretty far into the back end of the season, I highly doubt that there's going to be too many of the more hardcore players that are going to be rocking up. It's going to be fun regardless. Doesn't really matter who I'm playing against. Like, even if you're just playing casually against like juniors, even though there's probably a bit of a skill imbalance, you're still getting hands-on experience with the card game. You're going to improve a lot just at like your speed, even just like micro decision making, just getting some hands-on experience with any deck. Just it's always good. It's always good. And most importantly, I have fun and I enjoy it. So that's what we're rocking up to today. I did leave a little bit late. Rego was at 11:30 and it starts at 12 and it is currently 11:35. So we're coming in pretty close, but because I already have my deck list printed out, I'm not really too stressed. We'll just sit down, shuffle up, say g'day to everybody, and then straight into round 1, hopefully. I'll see you guys all on the way there. Now, first round of the tournament, we get paired into Brad. Now, Brad is playing a really rogue deck, which consists of Jinx EX as well as Hypno, which work together to put your opponent's Pokemon to sleep and then instantly knock them out. Now, this would be a super scary matchup for me if it wasn't for 1 card in my deck, the Mist Energy. This energy pretty much makes whatever Pokemon this card's attached to invulnerable to the entire main function of Brad's deck. But after I play Buddy Poffin on my first turn, I noticed something terrible. The Mist Energy is in my prize cards. There is a chance that I do not see this Mist Energy for this entire first game. So once knowing this, I have to completely change my game plan. We get a Jigglypuff off of our Buddy Poffin, as well as 1 Pidgey. We also Nest Ball for a Rotom, and that is fantastic as we get to use its instant charge ability to help us draw some cards. Brad does actually manage to get his deck to function pretty well off the rip. He manages to get a Bidoof down for a draw engine, while simultaneously also getting a Jinx EX in play, as well as a Frigibax to eventually become a Baxcalibur, and a Drowsy ready for that Hypno combo next turn. So with this pretty dominating board setup, I am now definitely on the clock. Going into my second turn, I know that I really need to go fast. So while I have an Ultra Ball in my hand, of which I could use to grab Pidgeot, instead I decide to go for a Lumineon. So by grabbing Lumineon, I can then use its ability Luminous Stein once placing it onto the bench to snag an Arven, which lets me really start comboing all these pieces in my hand together. So off this Arven, I go for 1 Forest Sealstone as well as a Rare Candy, which means that I can attach the Forest Sealstone to Lumineon and grab that Pidgeot EX that we could have got off the Ultra Ball. Now with the Rare Candy, we can evolve straight into Pidgeot EX and we have a Quick Search available. Now that I have a Quick Search available, I go and grab a Wigglytuff EX. Now I play this very conservatively by keeping this Wigglytuff in hand. This means that if he correctly identifies the threat that I have on my board right now, he'll still only get 1 prize card for it, which is more preferable to me. Then I simply attach my double turbo energy from hand to Jigglypuff, so then I can be attacking with Wigglytuff next turn, and then send it back to Brad. Brad's next turn, he's able to at least set up a Baxcalibur. However, due to me having a Sandshrew in the active, he doesn't really want to commit all of his resources to taking out that one single prize card. He holds on to everything to hopefully set up a more fruitful knockout on his next turn. But in doing this, it gives me that one extra turn that I desperately need. Given that one extra turn and the fact that I saw him put a Hypno into his hand, I know that it's time to target that Drowsy. I attach my fire energy from hand, I use his Beach Court to retreat into my Wigglytuff, and it's time to go full Nos. I already have Boss's Orders in hand to grab the Drowsy. And with that, I just go for the Friend Tackle to take the knockout on the Drowsy, which hopefully means that I'll be able to stay alive with my Wigglytuff for at least one additional turn. The next few turns just go back to back with me being able to chip down his Jinx. While he's not fully able to set up the attacker, I do penny up my Lumineon V, which is really good for me as it removes a 2-prize liability from my board, but it also gives me the extra utility to be able to place it back down onto my bench at any point and search my deck for another supporter. I finish the turn by hitting for an extra 160 damage, putting Brad's Jinx into KO range. In his following turn, however, he's able to attach enough water type energy to Jinx to actually swing into my Wigglytuff and then put me to sleep. But luckily for me, I played Sharon's Care. So I Sharon's Care up my Wigglytuff, and now here I can actually promote Pidgeot EX and get the KO on his Jinx EX with Blustery Wind. And thankfully, with that knockout, I managed to pull the Mist Energy off my 2 prize cards. Brad's then finally able to pull the combo together to get the Hypno down and then KO my Pidgeot in return with his Jinx. However, now that he isn't able to disrupt my hand, I'm able just to play down Wigglytuff EX, attach that Mist Energy, and all of a sudden, the game is going to be way too far out of reach for Brad to be able to come back into this one. Game 2, pretty simple. I managed to get the Mist Energy as well as set up a Jigglypuff on my first turn. And whilst getting a pretty strong board setup and establishing Pidgeot EX as well, I'm able to find the Hero's Cape. So now my Wigglytuff has 450 HP, and there's pretty much no hope that Brad can win. So we get around about 10 minutes into the game, and time is cold. No one's going to be able to conclude this game, so I managed to take round 1. The second round, I am paired up into Chris. Chris is going to Worlds with me this year, and he's been playing the game since like 2006, so he's very well versed in the Pokemon trading card game. Sadly, I lost the footage for the first 5 minutes of this match. I pretty much started the Radiant Charizard in my active spot. Luckily, I was able to get my bench set up pretty smoothly. I attached a Braviary Charm to the Pidgey so that it would not be able to get Radiant Greninja'd for the following turn. And then I'm also able to get Jigglypuff established onto the field as well, which can be a very good option to target down Chien-Pao's Baxcaliburs as a potential way of stopping them from being able to accelerate energies towards the end of the game. Chris's start is pretty weak. I see that he only gets 1 Frigibax down, and then he gets a set of Bidoofs down for his Buddy Puffin. Immediately, this raises a red flag, as usually we want to get an extra Frigibax down into play for that extra security on the board. This gives me the idea that he's prized 2 of his other Frigibax, which means that this could be a very, very hard game for Chris to set up. He finishes his turn playing a Cybermaniac to put any 2 cards from his deck onto the top, so that he's able to draw into them next turn. He proceeds to then knock out my Radiant Charizard, and then it's back over to me. Now, ideally in this spot, I'd probably prefer to be setting up my Wigglytuff EX onto the board. However, now that he's played Cybermaniac, I decide to go a little bit aggressive. And because his board setup's not that good, I play down a Misfortune Sisters. Any items or other good cards to the top of his deck, they'll now either be discarded or shuffled back in. I also play Counter Catcher to bring his B-Barrel up into the actives, and then simply just pass it over to him. Of course, never punished, Chris does manage to draw into an Irida for the start of his turn. And off this is actually able to establish a Chien-Pao onto the board, and play down a lot of pressure by knocking out my Pidgeot EX. Luckily for me, I prepared for this play. If he was able to knock out my Pidgeot EX, I have an Arven in hand for my next turn, which I can use to get a Hero's Cape, as well as getting a Wigglytuff EX with an Ultra Ball, to then leave this big beefy 450 HP Pokemon in the active, which, without a Lost Vacuum from Chris, means that it would require 8 energies in play at one time to one-shot this massive Wiggly, and then able to slow him down even more by gusting up his Baxcalibur. So even if he can get those 8 energies into play, he'll have to use 2 of them to retreat. Chris goes for a pretty strong play by benching his Radiant Greninja, and then by playing Superior Energy Retrieval, getting enough energy out of the discard pile to retreat the Baxcalibur and then start swinging with Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken. This then puts 90 damage on both the Wigglytuff and the Rotom, making the Wigglytuff a lot easier to knock out the following turn. However, before Chris attacks, he uses B-Barrel to draw cards, which means that now I have a much better chance of sniping some really good resources. We play down Eerie, and the hand looks pretty gas, with Rare Candy, Prime Catcher, and 2 Superior Energy Retrievals. Initially, I think to go for the Rare Candy, but then with a quick check of the discard pile, I realized that he's already used 2 Superior Energy Retrievals, which means he's only got 2 left, and those are the 2 in his hand. So I quickly pivot to discarding those 2 Superior Energy Retrievals. And with those essential resources in the discard pile, Chris decides just to scoop it up and go next. So we take game 1. Going into game 2, Chris gets a solid board started going first, and it is over to me. Of the Buddy Buddy Poffin, I go for a Pidgey as well as the Jigglypuff, as it gives me a pretty versatile board state as I'm going into turn 2. Now I make the decision that at this point, because my hand is pretty dead, I'm going to use my Ultra Ball to discard a couple of cards out of my hand and go for a Luminion to then use Luminion's Luminous Sign to grab an Arven, and then I'll use the Arven to search for a Bravery Charm as well as grabbing a Rare Candy. This Bravery Charm means that I'll be able to protect at least one of my 2 baby bench Pokemon from getting Moonlight Shuriken, and then I have the Rare Candy to potentially go into a Pidgeot EX next turn, as now that I attach the Mist Energy to Jigglypuff, both of these 2 Pokemon are posing a threat for the rest of the game. So Chris is going to have to decide which one to focus his first attack onto. Chris's returning turn, here it is for a Prime Catcher, allowing him to switch his Chien-Pao into the active and bring up my Pidgey. So it's decided that this turn, Pidgey is going down, and I decide to potentially sacrifice the fish. Due to us having a pretty dead hand, all we get to do is counter catcher up the Baxcalibur, and we have to spin the Pokestop. It's always grim when you're spinning someone else's Pokestop, but luckily, we managed to hit a second counter catcher, as well as we also find a very, very nice Nest Ball, which helps us to grab a Snorlax, which if we're going to be planning to keep these Baxcaliburs in the active, is going to be very essential, especially now that Chris has burnt his Prime Catcher, meaning that he potentially only has 1 more switching out in his deck. I attach the rescue board to the fish, and then we retreat back into the block Snorlax, and cross our fingers and pray that this Snorlax is still going to be able to stick by the end of this turn. Chris has a very rough Pokestop, discarding Iron Hands, Irida, and a Chien-Pao. He loads up the Baxcalibur and then also uses his boss to then focus down on the Jigglypuff. Now this means unless Chris is rocking a Power Pad, I've got some really strong potential lines of being able to lock all of his energies onto his board. I counter catcher up his Bidoof so that he has to attach more energies to it, and then I hit a beautiful Misfortune Sisters, securing a Super Rod and a Superior Energy Retrieval. Over to Chris, he's forced to evolve into his B-Barrel to draw some cards. Hits a Pokestop and gets a couple of energies, which isn't bad because he can play Super Rod to recover those. But then he just has to pass back to me. Now that I can tell that in my head, it's time to really push this advantage. So I start out with an Eerie to see what I can hit off of his hand. And we do manage to snipe an extra Super Rod and a Rare Candy as well. And just to punish his draw a little bit more, I decide to Lost Vacuum the Pokestop. Now Chris is in a very dire spot, and he's got no extra outs to getting rid of this Snorlax, so he purely has to swing in with the Bib. Whilst this B-Barrel's been stuck in the active, I've been able to safely establish a Pidgeot EX into play, in which I'm able to quick search for a boss's orders, and now bring up the extra Baxcalibur on the bench. He currently has no switching outs, and he's committed 6 energies onto his board. I decide just to Power Pad back the boss's orders into the deck for next turn, but Chris can see the writing is on the wall. He's got no more outs left to getting rid of this Snorlax. So Chris scoops it up and we take match 2. At a 2-0 record, we were jumping into the final round of the tournament. And in this, I got paired up against David. Now, I knew from the start David was going to be playing Charizard. He's played Charizard probably for the entire year so far, so I had a pretty good hunch that he was on the Zard. So recently, Charizards have been running a very control-heavy build, running Regieleki as well as Professor Turo and Powpad, with some even having pretty high Eerie counts for disruption. But then there's also been some stock standard Charizard lists that focus purely on consistency. But I was pretty confident that David's deck was going to be a little bit more control heavy. Means that I really have to switch on for this matchup. So David wins the dice roll and elects to go first. He manages to set up a Charmander with a Rotom on the bench and starts off with his Insta Charge. I've got my Roadie already in the active, so I just have to set up my bench behind me. Now, first thing I do is I grab a Pidgey and a Mimikyu off my Buddy Buddy Poffin. If David can manage to establish a Charizard EX, I want to make sure that I have that Mimikyu in play to really slow him down. Due to Mimikyu not being able to get attacked by any EX or V Pokemon, it would force David into having to get alternate attackers established. And then next, I also go for a Chiyu off my Nest Ball. If David does decide to lean into that Regieleki, I think my best option may actually be to go in and just start milling his deck, as unless I take one prize card, David's Charizard EX is never going to be able to one-shot my Chiyu. which works out super well for me being able to just penny loop it until he slowly runs out of cards. Now, David actually makes a very, very strong play here. He plays down a Eerie. Now, foolish of me, I have 2 Ultra Balls in my hand and I did not use them. I've had a couple of instances where not using an Ultra Ball when I know my opponent's playing Eerie has actually lost me games off the first turn. So David takes out my main 2 outs to actually finding Pidgeot straight off the rip. He manages to get a Charizard EX established in his active. He uses Charizard's Infernal Rain ability to then accelerate his 2 energies onto Charizard and 1 to Pidgey, and then he starts swinging into the Rotom. Now, luckily for me, in my hand, I do have an Arven and a Forest Sealstone, as that means that I can get my Pidgeot online regardless of losing my Ultra Balls. So I play down an Arven and I get a Rare Candy as well as a Bravery Charm. I then chuck the Forest Sealstone onto Rotom V and use Star Alchemy to then grab Pidgeot EX. With the Rare Candy, I can use Quick Search to go into my deck and grab any card, which in this case, I grab an Energy to retreat. This means that David's going to have to use one of his boss's orders to target down this Rotom if he wants to take those prize cards. And by promoting Mimikyu, it means that he cannot attack my active Pokemon, so he will have to find a Gust. And if he can't knock out that Rotom, I do have a penny in hand that I can use to pick it up the moment it comes over to my turn. Moving back over to David, he plays down an Arven, and as he searches through the deck, realizes he's made a major misplay. He's attached 1 energy to the Pidgey, which after searching through his deck, he now realizes that he's prized enough energy so that he won't be able to swing with any other Pokemon to attack this Mimikyu. So after realizing this, he scoops up and immediately goes to game 2. David starts game 2 with the Regieleki. And luckily for me, I'm super prepared for this card. Now, Regieleki uses its move, Electromagnetic Sonar, to get trainer cards out of your discard pile and put them into your hand. This means that the deck is able to recycle crucial resources like Eerie's to really focus on abusing your opponent's hand. So from here, I know I've just got to go fast. David isn't able to set up a Rotom, so at the moment his hand is going to be pretty limited, so I can freely go into my first turn and just get set up. I managed to get a bunch of Pokemon onto the board, as I know I really want to go into Chi-Yu and just start milling as soon as possible. So I put my main focus into getting a Pidgeot EX in play. This allows me to obviously grab anything I want out of my deck, and it's going to make it so much easier to establish that Chi-Yu. After 1 additional turn, I finally get the Chi-Yu up and ready to cook. Through a couple of turns of jealousy singeing, eventually time gets called. And due to both of us not being able to complete this next game, I managed to take the win off of David. Finish the tournament 3-0. And there's the final standings. Overall, really happy with this tournament. And then we move on to the best part of any tournament is always the prize packs at the end. But overall, had a fantastic day playing Control at this tournament. Always really, really good to get a first place position, obviously. Now we're on our way to our Worlds grind, so it's mostly just going to be testing from here on out. So super excited to test this Twilight Masquerade format. I'll catch you guys in the next one.